We're live? Okay. I'm Raymond Boucher. I recognize some faces here. Um, I've served youth for quite a while. I even served little Nader over here when he was just a little grade 9 youth. I served under Abu Troy in the high school service for over 15 years now until a few years ago, Abu Troy called me in his office and forced me into early retirement. That's just a joke. Until I had to take a break. But that's a little bit about myself. I have 3 young kids who keep us busy, and I was hoping to just go around the room. If you could just say your name and just one line about yourself in terms of where you are in the service. Are you serving right now, or what age group, or what you're looking to benefit out of this course? Father Dante, can we start off with you?
Yeah. Yes, I'm a Father Dante. I'm Philippines, serving at the Ethiopian Orthodox. I'm just newly a priest. I've been 5 years now.
Okay.
Yes, I'm from Sovica. I got interested in this course because we didn't have anyone that would help us in conversation.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Megan. I serve grade 11 girls at Sierra Master at Finland. I also serve grade 3 to 6 at Medina and Pittsburgh. Yeah, but I haven't done this course before, so wasn't sure I can say. Maybe you have to take the course.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Catherine. I serve grade 3 at the Culture-20240204. And I decided to take this course because I feel like I want to be equipped with the knowledge to take my kids, especially in Africa, and I want to be well aware of the environment that they're growing up in, like the changes that they're experiencing as they get older. So I feel like this course has been very important.
That's great.
I serve grade 2 third. Taking the course because after prepared to serve in Polish choice, he said he was interested in having younger servants.
Okay. Okay, good.
My name is Nadine. I serve SK in this church, and
Okay, great. That's great. Thank you. So we'll be talking about over the next few weeks about youth culture and communication. That's sort of the topic I've been asked to present to you guys. As you know, a lot of all this topic basically is extracted from the text that you guys have, and the idea is to kind of present the text in a lighter way, take the essential points out of it, and do some case studies. I have a few case studies for us to discuss today, scenarios, situations, article that we can read to kind of really help digest everything that we're trying to learn and put it into sort of practicality. I just got a new clicker here, so we'll see if it works. Maybe it won't. Is this saying something here? Leave the meeting. Is that? That's fine. Okay. All right. Nader, can you? Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is outlined from the syllabus. I had posted the syllabus online for you guys to take a look at. So basically, the idea is after we're done with this course, you'll have a better understanding of culture and Christianity for the youth. We're going to talk a lot about postmodernism today and what that means and how that really filters into everything that we kind of observe in today's culture. Characteristics of the youth culture in the West, strategies and how to speak to youth and how to better communicate. And that'll be the second half of our sessions. Again, it's sorry, the small print here, but basically today will be session 1, where we're going to talk about understanding culture and examining Christian culture. And in the second part of today, we're going to talk about postmodernism. Next week, we have those items, and then there'll be a big break, and then we'll be back again March 24th, March 31st, and April 7th, where we'll talk mainly focus about the laws of communication, just to give you an outlook of what's happening. Okay, So youth ministry is a cross-cultural ministry, okay? And the idea is we're looking to relate to people who live in a different world than us. That can apply to different capacities depending on who you are as a person. For example, we have a group here who are pretty young and pretty probably in tune if they were to serve next year with youth culture. But other individuals such as myself, um, you know, if I were to interact with youth culture nowadays, there would be a much larger gap. So regardless of it is, not only there's always going to be that gap, but it's constantly evolving. Like for example, for me personally, I remember I started off a little bit younger when I started in the youth service, and I could easily relate to the youth. I knew the lingo, like I knew how they spoke, I knew how they acted, what certain terminologies meant. But as I started, you know, getting older, and then you know, I went up to grade 12, then down to grade 9. All of a sudden, the second batch of grade 9s, that you know, grade 9 youth, I didn't really understand the lingo or the terminology that they were using. So it's something that's constantly evolving, and you might notice that even in your own selves at home if you have kids. I know my daughter; she's been wanting to be a preteen since she was 8 years old. I tried to convince her, "You're not a preteen yet." You know, now they're using language, different terminologies like sus. I just learned what sus means. Daddy, that is sus. And I know that's probably outdated now. That's probably been around for a few years. I'm dating myself. But just to give you an idea that it's constantly evolving, and there's always that challenge or barrier between who you are serving and where you are. So as we begin this unit on youth culture, we want to take some time to explore the basic principles of what it means to define culture. Okay, so we're really taking it back to basics. So basically, describing culture includes 5 main elements. Okay, and we're going to go over them right now. So the first one is symbols. Okay, and symbols typically refers to what is valuable. Um, what are the sort of the outwardly things that are involved in that specific culture? What is the evidence of that culture? Okay, what do people spend their money on? What do people you know, prize for convenience and comfort? What are the status symbols in that culture? Then we have behavior. You know, what is acceptable? Each culture has certain standards of behavior that are deemed acceptable. Okay, and basically, what are the norms within that culture? You know, uh, oftentimes, for example, you know, I went to visit Egypt a few years ago, and just witnessing how men, you know, interact with each other. For example, it's more common for a man to greet another man by kissing them on the cheek, where here it's not as, you know, as common. Or for men to engage each other as they're walking down, it's not, you know, it's not as common. So different cultures are known for different things. You know, Canadians are known for always being very nice. You know, there's even commercials that say thank you, thank you, thank you. So there's different behaviors that are often associated with different cultures. Values. That is the transition between the outer things such as behaviors and symbols to the inner. Okay, so what does this culture value on the inside? What do they like to spend their time? What do they value on human life and dignity? What is considered ethical in any given situation? So again, values, you know, marks the transition between external things that you can see, such as behavior or symbols, and comes to the internal things. Beliefs. Each culture has a set of beliefs to what they believe is true. Okay, and these are the underlying convictions about what is right or wrong. Okay, and it is beliefs that dictate these values: what is considered right, what is considered wrong, and so on and so forth. Morality and ethics. And the final one is the worldview. What is real? And it is the deepest level of the culture. It's the deepest thing that helps define where this culture is going. And it concerns the preconceptions and assumptions about life which a culture adheres to. Okay, what is the intrinsic value of mankind? What is the meaning of life? And how is truth determined? So you have this in your text. It's not very clear here, but basically, at the core of everything is the worldview. Okay, that is the core of the culture. And then we go over to beliefs, then values, then behaviors, and finally symbols. So everything starts off with the worldview, where that culture sees themselves with respect to the world, and then it moves outwardly of that. So, as a group activity here, and then we won't take too long in doing this, but let's just maybe say this out loud as a group. Let's examine one of my favorite cultures is hip hop culture. And let's define, for example, for this culture, some symbols. What are symbols of hip hop culture? Just put up your hand if you have something to say, just something to get everybody going. Good one, Nike shoes, Air Force Ones. They're everywhere. Yeah? Okay, yeah. Yeah, dunk sunglasses, good one, yeah. Yes, Fat.
But they look like clothing.
Look like what, sorry?
The clothing they
The clothing, yes, what they wear, it's very distinct.
so they can move.
That, exactly, yeah.
Like hand gestures.
Yeah, the way they talk, the way they act, yeah. Sorry, was there
Cool.
cool? Yes, behavior or mannerisms. So, yeah, and so let's move on to behavior. Some of the behavior, they're known for acting certain ways or doing certain things. What are certain tenets? And you actually, if you actually search this online, there's certain ascribed behaviors to hip hop culture. Okay, so what are some of the things that come to mind of things that somebody who's within that culture might do? Yeah. Sure, sure. Sleeping slang, or for example, they call it emceeing or rapping, more or less an extension of that, or using certain types of language. Maybe is what you're trying to get to. Any other input? Yes. Exactly. So here we have break dancing, which is a type of dance that they do for sure. How about values? This might be a little harder to determine because, like we discussed, it's something that they hold deep inside. It's maybe not that evident from the outside of the culture, but you know, believe it or not, like hip hop culture started from impoverished areas in the U.S. where there's certain values that they wanted to kind of express to the rest of the world, and those values could be social justice, peace, equality, things of that nature. So those are some values that would be within that culture. Anybody have a comment about values? Yes. Sure. Yep. Yep.
Evolved a little bit from what it used to be.
Okay. Do you have an example of that?
think hip hop used to be a lot more about social justice.
You're right.
Still a lot of hip hop about social justice, but now it's also very focused on.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's probably swayed from the origin or how it was started for sure, and it's triggered into different avenues for sure. But there is a root for it and how it started.
Modernizing.
That's right.
Compared to the older way.
Exactly. And the worldview, and this might be a tough one. So actually, one of the worldviews you could find of hip hop culture is that it helps use Black culture to preach about itself or to tell others about their own culture, as well as other Black people as well about their culture. So it communicates to both the culture within self and to the world. So those are just an example of one culture there. So at the core of culture is worldview, as we discussed. So what is the significance of worldview? It is that it is largely subconscious and most often more apparent to those outside of the culture than those within it. So that's one of the key things. There's a lot of things that we subconsciously um, don't know and subconsciously do and subconsciously believe because we've always grown up in it. And that is one of the key things about this world culture. And another significant part of it is the centrality of it, is that it is central to a person's expression of culture. What a person believes to be real in regards it's true as well as important. The formation of worldview. So while it forms the core of culture, the worldview is created by other elements of culture as well. And so to change somebody's worldview, you are basically going against the culture to within this individual has been raised. And then theology of worldview, obviously worldview is essential in a theological question as it answers the basic question of the perception of God and of man in relation to God. So what are the ingredients of worldview? It consists of three things, okay? A people's understanding of the world, what is the nature of truth, what is the basis by which truth is determined. B, it compromises of people's understanding of God. So a worldview is defined by people's concept of God. And thirdly, people's understanding of self. A worldview gives people a grid to which they view themselves. And what is this function? So the function is, first, it provides meaning, obviously. Okay? So it brings everything together. It allows people to translate the world or interpret the world around them with this worldview. It gives comfort. In a world of uncertainty and unpredictability, the worldview provides a degree of certainty for which they can, again, translate the world and translate what happens in the world. And it provides security. Worldview acts as a means to monitor new beliefs and behaviors that constantly confront us. So these functions provide us with reasons why it is hard for people to alter their worldview, to take an existing worldview and to begin to deconstruct it in favor of another. Leads a person through a lot of confusion, okay, a lot of turmoil and uncertainty. So this brings us now to challenging culture. When we serve young people, we are often faced with this challenge of leading them to embrace a new culture. And it's the culture of the kingdom of God. And we'll get into a lot about that in the coming minutes. But the gold standard is the kingdom of God, what Jesus or what God wants us to be based on the biblical teaching. And so in doing so, we must challenge aspects of the existing culture that they're in. So what are some approaches to challenging culture? So in the text, it uses the example of the parable of the sower and the seed. So we'll briefly go through that and try to determine what the text is trying to say as examples of how people sometimes challenge cultures or try to challenge a youth or change a youth's culture to adhere more to Christian culture or kingdom culture, and how those, although are a good first step, are not the solution. Can I have a volunteer just to read this out loud for us? Mikey?
One day Jesus told this story for a large crowd that had gathered from many towns to hear it. A farmer went out to plant some seeds. As he scattered it across his field, some seed fell on a footpath, where it was stepped on and the birds came and ate. Other seed fell on shallow soil under lying rock. This seed began to grow, but soon it withered and died for lack of moisture. Other seed fell among thorns and shot up and choked out the tender root. Still other seed fell on fertile soil. This seed grew and produced a crop 100 times as much as its companion. When he had said this, he called out, anyone who is willing to hear should listen and understand.
Thanks, Mike. So the first example approach was encouraging, and again, the author kind of interpreted this as encouraging people to adopt outward symbols of faith. So these might be wearing things like wearing a cross around the neck, wearing a bracelet. And although these symbols are great, they don't constitute a deep understanding of faith. And so the idea here is because they don't get to the heart of the person. They don't get to the heart of having the person convert or adopt this Christian culture. They get eaten by birds because they stay on the superficial. They stay on the top layer. And in here he's referring to verses 4 and 5. Another example he uses is about controlling behavior. And in this case, he likens controlling behavior and having a result of shallow soil. Again, because the behavior is just an outward behavior, it doesn't constitute real absorption or real knowledge of the word. Whether you try to do behavior in a positive way or a negative way, the seed will wither because of lack of moisture. And another example here he uses, according to verse 7, basically saying how by establishing certain Christian values for your youth ministry and expecting that person to conform to the culture that they're in. So by forcing them to act a certain way or to be a certain way, but then they're easily choked once they are presented with a challenge. So although, for example, a new person comes to the youth group, he goes through the motions of acting a certain way, but when they're left or on their own, when they're exposed to other trials or challenges on their own, they're easily choked because, again, they haven't really received the core or the true essential message of youth culture, or of Christian culture, I should say. Basically, what the author here says is, we take the example of verse 8, where we go straight to the point by giving people accurate information. You give the youth accurate information, and they're able to receive the seed of God's word and go on to produce a crop that's 100 times as much as he has been planted. So cut straight to the chase. So again, just to summarize this, the idea is here, outwardly things are nice and they can be used as a tool, but it doesn't constitute somebody who's fully converted themselves or adopted a certain Christian culture. Impacting worldview. So for culture to be entirely changed, a person must undergo a change of worldview. First and foremost, and it's something that's sort of beyond all our control, we just kind of pray for it, is obviously by the action of the Holy Spirit. Verse John 16 says, when the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. Obviously, the grace of God needs to be present for anything positive to happen. So that's the first thing that needs to be there. Second is by exposing inconsistencies. And Jesus often did this. In Matthew 12, they call him out for doing miracles or doing work on the Sabbath, and he tells them, if one of your sheep falls on the Sabbath, won't you pick it up? So by exposing inconsistencies in other worldviews that this youth might have, you may be able to kind of have them see what you see in their own Christian culture that you're trying to sort of present to them. Or by role modeling a worldview. A person's worldview can be changed when they have a first-hand alternative worldview that they live through another person. Matthew 5 says, in the same way, let your good deeds shine for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. I often say, or it's often said, I should say, that, real service starts after the lesson. The lesson is just a tool, but real service starts after the lesson, when you get to bond with the youth in an informal way. And, personally, I'm not involved today of youth service, and one of the main things that I used to love the most, and I feel is the most essential, is going on trips with your youth, spending those time with them. That is really the best way you can get to know your youth. Those are the most effective things that happen, and those are where the most effective memories that are created. And this kind of goes back to this point about role modeling a worldview. It's those opportunities that you can get to role model to your youth, what it means to be part of Christian culture. So, we talked about kingdom culture, which is sort of the ideal, basically straight out of the Bible. Okay, we're gonna get into that, but we're gonna talk about what it means to be Christian culture. So first aspects or first principles that we need to know is young people from strong families are likely to develop a stable faith than those who are not. That's pretty self-explanatory. Young people are more open to accepting Christ than older people. You know, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So, and that because young people are still in the process of affirming their worldview. So there's a bit of room to kind of change it or amend it a little bit. Third, young people from unchurched background who are strongly converted to Christian faith are frequently more radical and outspoken in their approach to faith than those raised in the church. An interesting point about this is because oftentimes, if it's a new convert to the church or somebody who just started, they're able to see maybe inconsistencies, whereas inconsistencies or a small difference between church culture and Christian culture, because there is a bit of a difference depending on the culture that you're in, or depending on which part of the world that you're in. So typically, sometimes new converts or somebody new to the faith might say, "Hey, this doesn't make sense. This is not in the Bible," you know. So we have to be aware of these things. So, and this is why it's important as you begin to minister to your youth is to, they often call it in the healthcare field. We have healthcare professionals here. You got to take a history. You got to know the history of the youth that you're serving. You got to know the history of the patient that you're seeing, because you got to know where they're coming from, and what history and what's going to contribute, how you could best serve that person. And this can also happen when you outreach them, when you go see them in their home. How does the home look like? You're able to tell, a bit of the history or the journey they've had from these simple things. So in this session, we will look at the culture of Christianity and the culture of church. And in doing so, we will come to a better understand the culture that we're calling people to come to. And it is important for us to differentiate this, okay, because you will be challenged by the youth. So now let's talk about kingdom culture. I've alluded to it before, and it is at the heart of Christian faith and life. And basically, this diagram is straight out of your book here. The idea here, and we talked about these things before, so it's a little dark here, but let's look at the bottom. You have worldview, beliefs, values, behavior, and symbols. The idea here is kingdom culture. It's really all based on this main foundation of worldview. And we're going to talk into what is the worldview of kingdom culture. And it comes straight out of the Bible. And so the idea is you establish this, and everything kind of falls into place, but there's less and less emphasis put on these things in terms of kingdom culture. We have our beliefs, values, and as you go down, symbols, we realize that Jesus never put a lot of emphasis on symbolic things. It was more on, the beliefs and the values. So a kingdom cultural worldview, what is real? To understand a kingdom worldview, we must first and the author uses this term, the Kingdom Manifesto, and it was taken from the Sermon on the Mount. And a lot of things were taken from this, from Matthew 7. But here, our author or the textbook uses the Lord's Prayer as a very nice foundation of the world, to establish the worldview of kingdom culture. I don't think we need to recite the Lord's Prayer. I think we know it, right? Mikey, I'll put you on the spot now. I'm just joking. The first one here is God as a father. Okay? And this opening verse teaches us very essential things. It's funny. Going through this exercise, we say our Father like how many times in our lifetime? And to really break down what every word means, it's actually quite powerful. And it's actually quite essential as you're ministering to the youth, as you're speaking to them. It is terminology that you can use to kind of bring things back and help them solve issues that they're going through. That God exists, And there is only one God whom we relate to. Okay? And we have access to this God. We pray to him directly. And we can enjoy intimacy with him because the term Father is used. It's a personal term. But at the same time, there is, respect and honor in that term. This is not my child, but oftentimes my kids know when they really want something badly, they use the puppy dog eyes and they really beg. And it's because they know me, because there's a familiarity. They have a personal relationship with me. Obviously, I hope so. And so that is the idea. I find the term "Our Father" is so powerful. And think how often we could probably use that as we're ministering to the youth when they're going through a tough time. And this is an essential part of worldview. God as a ruler, basically, very fundamental tenet here. And the idea here is the kingdom belongs to God. It is his kingdom. And God has a plan for mankind. The idea that the world is haphazardous and random and chaotic, that goes against the Lord's Prayer. God is the ruler. He rules us. And God is actively involved in the affairs of man. He's an active member. He's not passive. God is a provider. The idea here is that God will give us what we need, and he will provide us our sustenance for today. We have to trust in him that it will be today. We may not have the blueprint for everything, but we'll have it for today. God as a judge. Again, this is very important. As we later talk about postmodernism and other elements, where we find ourselves today in society, we are personally accountable to God for the things we do. God is merciful, and as citizens of his kingdom, we are to practice the same mercy and forgiveness. God is a deliverer. God is able to help us when we face temptation. God, who rules the kingdom, is more powerful than the ruler of another kingdom, the kingdom of evil. So we talked about kingdom culture, and we talked about the worldview by using the Lord's Prayer as sort of like the foundation for that. Now we're going to go on to the kingdom beliefs. What is true? And in these, the text uses the sort of the foundation of the Beatitudes. We won't go into them into details. It's a lot here, but basically, God blesses those who realize the need for him. He blesses those who mourn. He blesses those who are gentle and are lowly. He blesses those who are hungry and thirst for righteousness. These are all the beliefs based on these. He blesses those who are merciful, and so on and so forth. And the idea is here, the qualities that are valued in kingdom culture are dependencies, vulnerability, humility, justice, mercy, peace, to be peaceable, and self-sacrifice. And these all apply not only to our relationship with God, but they also apply to our relationship with others. Kingdom values, what is important? So the Sermon on the Mount also addresses the kingdom values in 3 dimensions. Gabriel, can you read that for us?
And now about prayer, when you pray, don't be like hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners and in synagogues where everyone can see. I assure you that is all the reward they will ever get. But when you pray, go away by yourself and shut the door behind you and pray to your Father secretly. Then your Father who knows all secrets will reward you.
Thank you. So the first one is the value concerning God and spirituality. And this comes up often. Who we really are is more important than who we appear to be. And Jesus made that very clear, that in our relationship with God, it's all about integrity. It's not about necessarily always the outward action. It is very easy, and why is this practical? It is very easy for youth to begin to develop the relationship with God, but not to get over-consumed with the superficial actions, okay? For example, a youth who runs to church so he can be a deacon, but then what are they doing outside of church hours? How are they acting? They're so consumed with, looking holy, and don't get me wrong, those are great attributes, but the idea is to really focus on the intrinsic or the inner values. And it's important for us to point these out, that there is a correlation between them acting, their behavior outside of church versus their behavior within church. Values concerning others. In Matthew 7:12, it says, do for others what you would like them to do for you. You know, one of the values and important values is charity. Doing unto others, because not only are we made in God's image, we are loved by Him. And then values concerning self. So Matthew 6:34, it talks about us being concerned for having subsistence or having food or being protected and that sort of thing. And the idea is here for us not to worry about these superficial things. This which is eternal is more valuable than which is temporal. This is very important because it can help give youth that encouragement and support, again, as you counsel them or help them, or you're there to support them through, through any tough situations they might be going through. Kingdom behavior, what is acceptable? Jesus had much to say about behavior on the Sermon on the Mount, and in doing so, he deals with a lot of things, a lot of aspects of behavior, whether it be through anger, adultery, marriage, and so on and so forth. But in this illustration, he talks about a few important things that we want to highlight. Us being the salt of the earth, we read this quite often, that we are the salt of the earth. And in this idea is that, and this is very important, within the kingdom culture, acceptable behavior is not an end of itself, but a means of honoring God and drawing others to Him. Okay? We are constantly witnessing, to God. I think this is a very important topic, especially as youth servants, right? You're constantly on the clock, whether you're serving actively that time or you're not. Whether you're at work, you're not. We're constantly have to shine and be the light of Christ. We are the salt of this earth. The narrow gate. Jesus talks about this quite often, that the citizen of the kingdom of God desires to live according to behavior that is acceptable will soon find it a narrow way. So, is there going to be tough times? Yes, we were told so. This is something that is quite often preached about. So again, things will never seem easy. Our culture, Christian culture, is not the easiest culture. Telling people to live in our religion is not an easy thing to do. And your youth will say, why do I have to do this? Why do we have to wake up so early? Why do we have to fast so often? It's the narrow gate, and we were told about this. Matthew 7 talks about to beware of false prophets. And again, acceptable kingdom behavior is not about the outward actions, but the inner state. A good heart will produce good behavior. And then finally, the outcome of acceptable behavior is building the house. And the idea here is we simply have to obey the teachings of Jesus, according to here, when it was referenced here in Matthew 7, about how it is important to listen, to obey God like the man who built his house upon the rock, to build it upon a foundation on the teachings of Christ. Kingdom symbols, what is valuable? The idea here is Jesus taught that only symbols of value in his kingdom were those that had eternal significance. So, the last verse, wherever your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So again, the emphasis is on not so much on worldly symbols, but on the heavenly things that matter, the eternal things. Culture of the church. So we talked about kingdom culture. Okay, now we're going to talk about culture of the church. Okay, we're not going to delve too much in this because it does really, obviously we have our own church culture. But the idea is that the church is a visible representation of the kingdom of God, and it is called to live out kingdom culture on earth. Okay? We know from biblical teachings that the culture of the early church, they had places of gathering. In Acts 2:42, it says they worshiped together at the temple each day and they met at home. So we know that existed. we know there was an order of service. God is a God of order, and so we know that happened in the early church, and we know that conduct, they were told to act in a certain way. In Corinthians, Apostle Paul commanded men not pray with heads covered, while women must cover their heads, and so on and so forth. The culture of Christianity. So both the New Testament church and today's church are seeking to be appropriate to the culture in which they find themselves in. So this is sort of where things get a little tricky, and the idea is to identify what we're pushing for. So their goal is to take aspects of kingdom culture, so basically everything found biblically, that is biblically sound, and create a Christian culture that incorporates church culture and is relevant to the culture of the world. And this process is known as contextualization. Contextualization. So this, and this is straight out of your text here. So the core again of everything is you have kingdom culture. Okay, this is sort of the gold standard. And you have world culture. Outside here is the church culture, but Christian culture aims to combine everything. The idea is you want to hear what the world has to say and incorporate some of the world cultures within your specific environment or your social structure, but don't forget that you have to adhere to the principles of kingdom culture as well. You realize something very important, that world culture and kingdom culture do not intersect. It cannot, because kingdom culture is strictly biblical. Okay, the foundations and the tenets in there cannot be changed or cannot be applied to anywhere else. However, in our Christian culture, it will vary depending on the effect of the world culture that you're living in. Is anybody asleep yet? Still awake? We're good? Okay. I promise we'll get to some case studies later on. We'll get through this tough part and we'll get people talking. So, so to kind of break this down, kingdom culture versus world culture. The kingdom culture is separate from culture. It needs to be for two reasons. It is not always compatible with the culture. The culture of the world is not always compatible with the culture of the kingdom. You know, stop loving this evil world and all that it offers. For when you love the world, you show that you do not have love for the Father in you. So it's very clear that they stay separate. They cannot be affected by it. And more importantly, kingdom culture needs to be separate from and unhindered by the cultural norms of any society in order for it to be relevant by all. So imagine if you change kingdom culture to be relevant to a specific society or cultural norms, you won't be able to change it again for a different culture if things were going to be changed. Christian culture versus church culture. Church culture constitutes a part of a wider Christian culture. It both reflects wider Christian culture and is affected by it. And then when we compare Christian culture versus world culture, Christian culture are influenced by the culture of the world, even incorporates some of it. So what are some of the challenges of contextualization, of putting these together and sort of trying to get them to act as a cohesive unit? The challenge of transference, or transferring one to another. Okay? The danger we face is the kingdom of God to conform to cultural norms that might appear to be Christian, but are in fact our own cultural expression of the church. So it was a problem faced in the early church fathers, or the early church. Basically, in this text here, they talk about circumcision, and that decision basically talking about the Jews who converted to Christianity versus the Gentiles who are not circumcised and converting them to Christianity. And they're, you know, St. Paul basically discerned that as long as you believe in Christ, that's all that matters. The circumcision was a cultural thing, and it didn't need to be done. So the idea is God had obviously accepted the Gentiles regardless of circumcision. Therefore, Jewish Christians must do the same. The Jewish Christians need to accept the Gentile Christians because God had accepted them regardless of what cultural norms they were adhering to. And then the challenge of conversance. So I looked this up. It means awareness. So the idea is as we seek to minister to young people, living in a Western cultural worldview and disciple, we need not only have a good understanding of what constitutes kingdom culture, which is the gold standard, we also need to be aware with the prevailing culture of the day. You have to be, it's essential. What does the gospel talk about, contextualization? How does it refer to this? There's two basically principles to keep in mind. The first one is the message of the gospel transcends culture. This is very nice and very important. Peter replied and said, I very clearly see that God doesn't show partiality. In every nation, he accepts those who fear him and do what is right. Peter spoke these words after having received a vision that is clear that the gospel was for the Jews as well as the Gentiles. The presentation of the gospel can incorporate culture. This is a very common verse that I'm sure we've all heard. When I'm with the Jews, I become one of them and I can bring them to Christ, and I will follow the Jewish laws, and so on and so forth. So while the content of the gospel remains unchanged, its presentation can vary depending on the culture of those to whom it's being communicated to. So there's a lot of things happening here, but I think the key thing is you're gonna be in positions to use this information, but in your mind, it has to be, you have to kind of understand what you're doing, in the sense of, you understand maybe now you're gonna maybe refer to somebody's culture or refers to using a specific aspect of what this youth is used to, but in your head, you're not changing things or changing the meaning of what the gospel is saying, or changing things to benefit a certain end. The idea is, the aspects at play, the things at play, and you're using them, but you have an end goal of bringing them back to the gospel, teaching them back about Christian culture. All right, case study time. You guys want to take a little 10-minute break, and then we'll tackle a case study, and we'll go from there. Came up with a little case study here. And the idea is, as best as possible, we want to put all this text into real practical example as much as possible, to be, with the end point of ministering to youth. So, Jacob, a high school student, found himself drawn to a group of peers who engage in gossip and bullying as a means of social bonding. In an attempt to fit in and gain acceptance, he participated in harmful behaviors towards a fellow student. After hearing about this, you approach him after youth group and take the initiative to approach him on a one-on-one level. So using the kingdom culture worldview characteristics discussed earlier, please provide a framework of how you would address the following scenario. So I know you have it all memorized, but I'll So remember, we had discussed it first. One of the first things we talked about is taking the Lord's Prayer as a template, and then using these aspects to help define our kingdom culture worldview. So I would like to ask if maybe we break down into groups. If you guys just want to, I see here like 2 groups of 3, and then 1 group of 4. If you want to kind of get together and discuss how you would outreach the student based on what he's done, or not outreach, but just kind of minister to them and speak to them. Oftentimes you'll notice, if you know your youth really well and you notice behavior that they're doing that is not within their character, you'll feel compelled to outreach to them. You'll feel compelled to, hey man, what's going on? Why are you doing this? This is not your usual behavior. And so this is sort of something that I've personally experienced, and I'm sure you will if you haven't already done so. So if we can kind of get together and talk about that using this framework, maybe we'll do it like breakout for 10 minutes. And if it's okay, you guys could just assign somebody within the group to just present for a few minutes your approach or your findings. Thank you. why there's division, between Eastern Oriental Orthodoxy, between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, etc. Given the verse, in truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. It's a very good question, Jessica. Obviously, unfortunately, religion has a lot of influence with humans, man-made, and so a lot of times these schisms or these disagreements could be over, without getting too theoretically dogmatic. It is essentially, a lot of it is man-made, and the idea is the spirit of the gospel and the spirit of the message is still there, and that's even more important, and it really segues nicely into what we're doing here, because when we're talking about the tenets of the kingdom culture, I find it very hard to believe that any of these religions will disagree with how you guys are going to counsel this youth based on, the Lord's Prayer and based on the items mentioned in the Lord's Prayer. So I would counsel the youth and say, essentially saying, although there might be some variations in Christian culture or different, dogmatic things they believe in, but the hope is, for the most part, they're all the same message of Christ, the same message of the gospel is evident and preached in those religions. So, having said that, who would like to be the first to start to present for the group for the case study? George, oh, go ahead. Sorry, what's your name?
You called his name.
No, go ahead. Michael. Thank you, Michael. Go ahead.
Michael.
And before, I don't mean to interrupt. The reason I really liked this case study is because oftentimes, especially bullying and group behavior, is not very evident in youth ministry. Like they might make fun of somebody, especially with guys, and it doesn't look as hard, but it doesn't look as dangerous or as serious, and obviously that happens among the girls as well. So oftentimes it flies under the radar, but it can be very harmful to youth. It can be very harmful behavior for their self-esteem, how they perceive themselves to be in a youth group. So addressing that and creating this safe environment in a youth group is very important. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, so for the God as Father, we took the approach of, if God is our Father, then he's also everybody's Father. Therefore, all those people are your brothers and sisters. Right. So like, why would you want to do that to your brother and sister? Or imagine if your brother and sister was doing that to you.
Very nice.
For God as ruler, we took the approach of God sees everything. So even if you think like you're going off with these friends like away and you don't think, your parents haven't found out or something like that, God still sees everything and he knows all. For God as provider, we thought of it as like, the reason he's engaging with these friends is because he or she wants to fit in. But we were saying how God will provide you with like the friends that you're looking for, like positive friends, if you do good things, and you don't need to like do bad things in order to seek validation from those people.
Good, you're addressing the fact that he's doing this for a reason. Like there's a deficiency that he's feeling. Good.
For God as judge, we thought of like two different ways to approach it. So the first is that the way that he's treating other people is gonna be like returned to him on judgment. So we don't want to be harsh with people because we don't want God to be harsh with us, but we also wanted to provide hope and say that like, no matter what he's done and how poorly he's treated these people by bullying them or gossiping about them, there's still like forgiveness and God will be merciful towards him. And finally, for God as deliverer, we acknowledge that like it's not easy to stop gossiping or to stop bullying right away. So anytime we feel that he or she feels the temptation to continue, they can cry out to God and God can deliver them from that temptation.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you, guys. You guys did some good work over there. I was doubting with Mikey and Gabriel, but thanks for carrying them home.
No, they carried.
Who's next? Well, we're already on this side, so we might as well. Behold the microphone. Thank you so much. You're welcome.
Okay, so for God as Father, we kind of just said that like God is like his father, so that means he loves him and like cares for him a lot, and that he doesn't need to like do things to fit into a group, because either way like God loves him, even if like and he doesn't have to like be mean to other people for validation, because at the end of the day, like God is the one judging him, which kind of goes to like God is the judge, where it's like God is the one judging you, so like be careful what you do, sort of. For God is ruler, we said that like God has a plan for you. So we said like on one hand we'd pray for him to like that God's plan is like evident, and also to like encourage him to pray that like whatever God's plan for him will like be. Um and then that sorry. For God as provider, we said that like or no, the deliverer, we said that like God won't give you more than you can handle, so he'll deliver you from like the things that you're dealing with, because like Michael said, it's not exactly a easy thing to like leave a group or stop bad habits.
Right.
So that like God will deliver him from the time that like he has to um deal with. And then um God is provider, it's just that like after he deals with it or while he's dealing with it, God will give him like the means to deal with it, and also will give him the friends that he needs and stuff in his time. So yeah.
Very nice. Thank you. Last but not least,
So all of our points have pretty much been mentioned before, but I will just reiterate them.
oh sure, no, I'm joking. Yeah, go ahead.
So God as Father, kind of like what was mentioned before, like He is our Father. He's someone like personal to us, and not just like some authority figure. And so, because He's our Father, like we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and so we should treat each and every one of us with love and respect. And also not to upset the Father as well, because we're all connected, and so when one part of like the community is hurt, then like we all suffer as well. For God as ruler, like this entire world belongs to him, it's not ours. And so God has a plan for each and every one of us, and he is the one who takes care of us. He rules everything, he makes the rules, and so we should abide by that. God is provider. He understands our need for socialization, and God knows that we're very social beings. We need like friends, we need a community, and so he recognizes that, and he will give it to us, and we don't have to seek it for ourselves. God as judge is important because despite him being very open and loving, like he's also very strict on what's right and what's wrong, and so we should still make the point that yes, bullying is wrong. It shouldn't be tolerated in the community, and you're going to be accountable for it in the future. And so we should aim towards, like kind of like getting rid of that. And finally, God is deliverer. He understands how difficult it is, the temptation, the peer pressure, people who are bullying, and like the feeling of needing to be accepted by your group of friends, and engaging in such behavior. And so
Very nice. Thank you very much. Sorry, Nader. Can you just let me know if there's any chat questions? It's going to be hard for me to say. Is there anything?
No, nothing.
Nothing.
so
Okay.
far.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. That was very, very well done. And basically, we had, everything you touched upon here is what's on here. And again, going back to Jessica's question is so timely, because a lot of these things, like we said, are kind of universal truth, regardless of the church culture that you're in, or regardless of whatever specific, part of the world that you're in. These are all biblical truths. These are all part of the kingdom culture, and they're universal truths, and they can apply to any Christian atmosphere. So thank you for going through that exercise. Before we move on to our next topic for today, postmodernism, do we have any questions about this right now? Any specific things that? Yes, go ahead.
Not really a question, but more just a comment that just came to mind when we're talking about God as ruler, because this is something that I've tried to impart on my Sunday school kids in the past before. Like, we understand that God is ruler in terms of the fact that He is King. Christ is our King, and we are all called to be sharers in His kingdom. Like, one analogy that I used before with my Sunday school kids is, if God is the King, then we are all like princes and princesses in His kingdom. and we don't wear like earthly crowns, but the crosses that we wear are sort of like our crown. And so if we are called to be part of God's kingdom, then we're called to be kingdom ambassadors. And when you think about like Kate Middleton or princes and princesses of the world, they're held to a very high moral standard. So if we are called to be sharers in God's kingdom, then that means when we wear a cross means that we also ought to hold ourselves to a high moral standard. This is how earthly kings and queens and princes, society puts them on a pedestal. We ought to also sort of put our moral values and character sort of on a higher level because we're called to be kingdom ambassadors. So just something I thought of when you.
Very nice. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And it comes to a few things that we alluded to earlier, where we are the salt of the earth and we're constantly witnessing to Christ. We're always, we're not just serving those few hours and then we just become ourselves. And whether it be at the service, a youth servant, or just as a Christian, you're right. And we do ought to hold ourselves to a different standard. We are different. Absolutely right. The royal family, I don't like to hear about them because it's something that's personal. No, I'm just joking. No, but you're absolutely right. Like everybody wants to know what Kate Middleton is doing. She went to the hospital and then she left home, and they carry themselves in this way, this dignified manner, and we should always aim to do that. That's a really nice analogy. Thank you for sharing that. Any other comments? Okay. So let's move on. Postmodernism. It sounds like a very complicated word. I'm not sure if these studies have made it into university. Back in my day, years ago, it was just starting to talk about it. But as you read about it, as you become acquainted with it, you realize that it is the foundation for everything that's happening now, and it's very important that we take time to really understand the tenets and the thinking and the line of thinking behind what postmodernist thought is. So all cultures have a worldview, and our focus in this session is the worldview that permeates so-called Western culture, okay? And that is postmodernism. It's hard to precisely define what postmodernism is because it literally means post or after modernism. And so why don't we look into what modernism and that means. So we'll go back in history. We'll go way back here. So there's 3 paradigm shifts. So all throughout history and up to 1500 AD, you had pre-modernism, okay? And what did that allude to? Basically, it alluded to divinity or God being the center of the universe. Everything was predicated about your belief in God. The church controlled everything. The church knew everything. There was not much separation between church and state. And so the ultimate truth, God or divine reality, was the source of all truth. Then between 1500 and 1960 or so is the second major paradigm shift, the age of scientific reality. People generally believe that the ultimate source of truth and knowledge was scientific discovery. And then we head into postmodernism from the 1960s to current time. And that is basically what the author calls, and very appropriately so, virtual reality. Or basically, it is believed that there is no ultimate source of truth and knowledge. Okay, neither religion nor science. So this debunks both science and religion. And it's basically saying that each individual is socially constructed by the society that they live in. Each person's reality is created by the experiences that they gain from the society that they live in. So we know how pre-modernism happened. Obviously, divine reality, it was simpler times. So how did the rise of modernism, how did that happen? Basically, it created a great challenge to the supremacy of the church, and it set in motion the church and the rise of secularization today. One of the main things that happened was the Renaissance. It was an age of revival of architecture, art. A lot of famous people, originated in this Italy, in this era, in Italy in the 14th century, and later spread throughout Europe. The idea here, it was essentially a humanistic movement, okay? And it basically directed people's attention from God to human and human accomplishment. What can the human do? The human was an artistic person. They could write, they could do scientific research, so on and so forth, and they can develop things scientifically. So that was the idea behind the Renaissance. And then you had the Reformation, the Great Protestant Reformation. So obviously that weakened the stance of the church at the time. So all of a sudden the church wasn't this one body, all uniform. There were starting to be divisions within the church. So obviously that will inevitably weaken inherently, the hold of Catholicism and church. Obviously, it refers to Catholicism often because it was obviously the major Christian denomination throughout history or at that time. And then we have science and humanities. Advances in this field started to really gain through the modernist area. You had Galileo saying, discovering gravity, and how saying the Earth is not discovering gravity, but basically coming to the conclusion that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and therefore you kind of, by doing that, you're kind of saying that God is not the center of everything. Newton's law of gravity, again, God isn't holding everything together, it's gravity. We know about Darwin and Marx, and Freud, claimed that religion was as an illusion, and so on and so forth. So again, people started opening their mind, doing research, thinking, writing books. So created this, maybe God isn't the center of everything. Maybe God isn't the cause of everything. And then we have the Enlightenment, where Western culture was founded on ideas of Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. And the idea here is, and the main tenet, the critical point here is, while there was differences, both believed that all reality was scientific, all realities, whether it be scientific or theological, was ultimately knowable. And so the idea is, you can test anything you wanted to know, you can find it out. It wasn't something that you just needed blind faith to know. So idea here is, theology was no longer knowable, instead requiring blind faith. Since you couldn't test theology, you couldn't test the existence of God, and therefore you couldn't really know it. And so eventually the mantle of authority was gradually removed from God and placed upon man. You also had the Industrial Revolution, again, bringing power more to man. People started to come up with factories, economies were starting to grow, advances in agriculture, and so on and so forth. And so the idea is, you're bringing more people together, advancing more ideas, and that slowly led to the acceleration of the progress of secularization. Ironically, the response of the church, it's well documented how the church really fought against Galileo. And so oftentimes, the church had a response where they kind of tried to shut people or hush people. They didn't really take them too seriously. And so it was the way the church responded that kind of led to this idea of modernism, in that it became discredited in its abilities. It fought science vigorously to both discredit and ban its discovery. And consequently, the church lost credibility and alienated itself from the people. Now, so what happened? We have this rise of modernism, and then slowly modernism started to decline. And so why did that happen? Basically, you had the halt of progress. So, 1914 to 1945, my wife's a history teacher, so I know these dates pretty well. The two world wars and the Great Depression. So leads us to say the wars, the Great Depression, slowed down the halt of any enlightenment or any progression. So that happened. You had the loss of idealism, as the text says, because the Western world was in such political turmoil at the time. Fall of communism, and then you had scientific uncertainty. Although Albert Einstein was a genius and Charles Darwin gained a lot of popularity, there were still holes in their theories. They weren't 100% true. So you had people doubting, okay, what is true? And then in come postmodernism, postmodernist thought. At the heart of this, of postmodernism is, in contrast with modernist thought. Modernists believe that truth is absolute, regardless of your personal beliefs. So truth is this thing outside of who you are or what you believe. It doesn't matter what you believe or what you think. The truth is the truth. It can be tested. It's something tangible. However, postmodernists believe truth is relative, okay, based on your own personal opinion. And the author points out the irony is that postmodernist thought is thought to espouse theories about relative truths as though they were absolute. So you see the irony there. But regardless, at the heart of the message is, modernists believe truth was external. It can be tested. It's tangible. The postmodernists believe truth is relative and is based on your own experiences. And things such as truth is whatever you want it to be. A postmodernist would believe truth is whatever you want it to be. Even if there was something as absolute truth, there is no way we can test it. There's no way we can actually know it. And they even go far as to say, beware of the person who believes in absolute truth. Postmodernism and culture. So modernists view people as independent individuals who think for themselves, okay? While postmodernism see individualism and thought as the product of culture. So the theme you'll see time and time again with postmodernist view is you are a product of the culture that you're in. You are the product of the scenario or the situation or the environment that you're in. And that is the key thing, that is the main tenet that keeps coming back. And yeah, in other words, what you believe is as true is influenced by the culture which we live in. Postmodernism and language, and this is very, very important. And it's got one point here, but we'll get into it a little bit later, how this filters into everything that we know today. Language is the critical element of culture because we all interact through language. So the idea here is, sorry, one second. The idea is postmodernists say that labels we attach to ideas and belief are arbitrary because language is always evolving. So what is the scope of postmodernism? First of all, secularism, our understanding of the world. Postmodernism alters the way young people relate to the world. Without the understanding of our all-knowing, powerful God who loves them, they adopt a secular mindset in which there are no absolute standards of morality at all. Choices and decisions are based basically on what the individual feels is true or is right. Secondly, is spirituality. Now, here's the key thing about postmodern thought. They allow for people to express spirituality. Okay, they're okay with you saying you believe in a God. People are free to pursue their own quest for God according to their own culture or experience. Just don't say that your God is the only God. Just don't say that your God, there are no other gods but your God. Feel free to believe what you want to believe. They're not against that. But just don't imply what your beliefs are, or don't think that your beliefs ought to apply to somebody else. So, and it's encapsulated in this quote here. Postmodernists have no problem with religion as long as it makes no claim to universal truth and has no authority. Okay, so a postmodern will believe in God. We believe in God. So don't be confused with that. They're okay with the belief of God as long as it's just not their God. Selfism, or our understanding of self. Without the hope that comes from knowing God, and without absolute truth, it is little wonder that people struggle to find their sense of meaning and the satisfaction in life. So, and the text is very nice, and it points out the interplay. there's an interplay with these three things that we mentioned: secularism and how it causes a loss of absolute truth. The loss of absolute truth in young people causes them to lose their way and to lose hope. And in turn, this leads to a life that lacks satisfaction and a further question for meaning and truth. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So it's drawn in a different way in your text, but it's very, very nice. You start off by, you have this loss of truth, okay? And that's basically secularism. You don't believe in God, therefore there is no truth. This will, this will lead you to a loss of hope. Leading you to a loss of hope, leading you to a loss of hope will lead to a loss of meaning, okay? That loss of meaning will in turn lead you back to a loss of truth, and therefore the circle kind of returns to itself. And so what happens when, you start not on the foundation, on a strong foundation, you see this inevitable circular truth that will lead people or the youth down a very tough path. What is the influence of postmodernism? And when we begin to talk to this, you'll realize everything that's making headlines, I shouldn't say everything, a lot of things that are making headlines in today's news is based on this thought process. Postmodern thought influenced many areas of society today. For example, in education, okay, and this is really a major target right now. They believe that teachers are no longer the transmitter of information, and instead, the idea is to assist the child to cultivate or construct their own knowledge. And in the curriculum, every effort is made to balance out any perceived cultural bias. Terms in assessment such as top of the class or wrong and fail, they eliminate any competitiveness. Everything is kind of with whatever that child is individualistic. Health, and this is a key thing, and we're going to get into this a little later in our case study. But anybody following the news, what the Alberta Health Minister has done recently? Any takers on that? Anybody? This is making headlines every day for the last few days. Yes, go ahead. Pardon me? That's right, it has to do with that, you're right.
You're not required to inform the parents of any changes like their pronouns or like setting the transitioning.
Yes. So the idea was, anybody else have a comment to say about this before, like anybody read the articles? So yes, go ahead.
Parents have to give consent for children.
Yeah, so there's a few things involved in it, but one of the main things, the most recent thing is that the health minister reversed an order to basically say they're not going to allow, gender transformation surgeries or any major medical procedures if you're a minor under the age of 16. They're not going to allow that, especially if I can't remember if the consent of the adult is there, but definitely if there's no consent of the parent. And there is so much backlash over that. Like the federal government is getting involved because she's taking this very harsh stance. And we're going to talk a little bit about also how they incorporated forcing youth to having a communication between the parent and the teacher, and how if the high school student wants to be called by a specific pronoun before, you didn't need the parent permission, but they reversed that in 2 provinces, and now Alberta, they're reversing that where you need the parental consent. Of course, our this is on video, so I shouldn't bash the federal government, but obviously there's a lot of people federally who are opposed to that, and they've expressed a concern about that. But anyways, that's just a small, when you talk about how it affects your health, that is basically a very small example of how these decisions on this thought can affect the major decisions of healthcare. Literature. In literature, the primary significance of a text is no longer what the writer intended. So they go as far as to say that this person who wrote the text was so influenced by their surrounding culture that, you know, it doesn't really matter what they said. It's a reflection of the culture at the time. It's a reflection of how he was feeling at the time. So it just, you know, it's an opinion at the time. There's nothing absolute about it. And history is the same way. The idea is here, there is so much bias in history, and it's so biased towards specific ethnicities or specific types of people that it's hard to take history, you know, at its word or authentically. That you have to take it, you know, kind of with a grain of salt. And the main tenet with law is that, again, the law system is so inherently biased against the marginalized, the underprivileged people, that the law system needs to be overhauled because it doesn't give everybody equal rights within the legal system. Psychology, you know, postmodern psychology and counseling begins with the premise that what is reality for the client is reality. So, you know, however the client is feeling, that's okay. There's no sort of way to try to treat things, or there's no ultimate, you know, goal that's outside of what the client feels. Language, obviously, politically correctness. You know, we talked about it when it was referring to pronouns and so on and so forth. How that is, you know, affected by postmodern thought. Religious beliefs. Modernists viewed religion with disdain. And this is sort of, again, a very important distinction. Labeling it as a crutch for the weak. Postmodernism is more accepting of the value of religion, providing it is tolerant of the beliefs of others. Because there is no absolute truth, there can be no absolute religion. So again, going back to that point that I talked about earlier. And a very important point here is about biblical interpretation. And their whole thing is, it's so reader-centered that, you know, anybody can interpret the Bible however they seem fit, because it's all about how you interpret the Bible within your context of your culture. So you could see how that kind of opens up a Pandora's box. You know, there's obviously many ways that you can critique postmodern thought or postmodernism, but here are some of the ways out of out of the text. In general, in Proverbs, it said, there is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. So the idea is, each person might feel their own path or might feel that they have their own path, but we have to be wary of it. And the postmodern represents an abandonment of God's way. Okay, a sovereign God is no longer the author of the absolute truth, and over which we, with our cultural perception of reality, are sovereign. Postmodernism and culture. The idea here is postmodern advocates a respect for people's culture, yet it goes far to realize that there is a kingdom culture that transcends all human culture. Any aspect of human culture that contradicts this is rightly labeled as wrong. The influence of postmodernism is not all bad. Okay? In many ways, it represents an improvement over the anti-God philosophies of modernism. However, they've taken it to the extreme with no reference to God's absolute truth. Okay, we're at our case study. So why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll tackle this case study when we get back. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll bring it back here. So that is some happening ringtone. So to wrap up today, we have I have two case studies prepared. So we're going to do this one, and then there's another one, just to give you an idea, and then we'll conclude to see if you have any questions, and wrap it up for at around 6 or so. So this is a case study here. Emily, a grade 12 high school student, finds herself facing a moral and ethical dilemma related to academic integrity. She is known as a diligent student with aspirations to attend a prestigious university, and she's currently enrolled in an advanced placement course that is particularly challenging. Emily has been struggling with her physics class due to the difficulty of the material and the pressure to maintain high marks for university admissions. One day she discovers that the upcoming midterm exam has been left unattended on her teacher's desk. The teacher momentarily called away, unintentionally leaves the room without securing the exam. Emily is torn between her desire to perform well in the class and the ethical implications of potentially exploiting the situation. Hits a little close to home. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So I'll ask you guys to break out into small sessions. So we have lost a few. So what are we at here? Let's keep it like a group of 3 here. You 2 guys are big boys, you guys, and then this 3 over here. Discuss why Emily may and can use elements of postmodernist thought to take advantage of her situation to justify potentially cheating on her exam. So we'll give you guys a few minutes to talk about this. You guys ready? Father Dante and you guys need a few more minutes? We have time if you guys. Okay. All right. Who would like to start off by presenting their findings? I see you raising your hand. Go ahead, Gabe.
So first, like basically, oh, so we're saying like her arguments for why she thinks like cheating is okay. So first, she could be like, based on her experience, she knows that like a lot of her people she knows, her friends, people like maybe her role models, they cheated and they got good marks. So if they can do it, then that's probably okay. It's fine for me to do it, you know, if everyone else is doing it. And then another thing could be like my goal in my family, they want me to get the best marks. My goal is to get the best marks possible. And then looking at the answers is gonna help me get the best marks possible. That's my job. So therefore I'm just doing what my like, purpose is. So I'm not really doing anything wrong. Another thing that we can say like, oh, my philosophy is that like I just can't hurt anyone. So I'm not really hurting anyone if I just go and look at the answers. And was there anything else? Yeah. So yeah, I think that's good.
Thank you, Gabriel. It's kind of it's a little scary how it's easy to convince yourself, right? Like, let's be honest. I'm sure after going through this exercise, you're like, oh. Yeah. So that's really what makes this so challenging, right? Who would like to go next? George.
All right. So a lot of it was already said with Gabe,
Oh,
but
sure, George.
that's what I'm going with. But basically, one of the things that we were talking about was essentially how it's very competitive out there and applying to universities and things like that, and how sometimes it's not necessarily the most even playing field, and how you can kind of convince yourself or even go down the rabbit hole of it's already hard enough. Why not just make it a little easier and just take the exam? And it's not necessarily causing any harm to anyone else. It'll just help me. It'll just benefit me in the sense of being able to get better grades to apply to whatever prestigious university that Emily would like to go to. Another thing is the fact that essentially there's nothing wrong with it if I'm not necessarily impacting anyone else, as I just said earlier. So that's more so two additional points to that.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, just kind of bouncing off everyone else's points. I think like since Emily is like a very diligent student, she might be able to justify, taking a look at the test because she feels like, she deserves it. She's been working so hard and it's very competitive out there. And so to have like this advantage would be huge for her in her future in choosing a university as well. One of the things we did point out was like this postmodern world really blurs the line between right and wrong and this sense of, okay, what is that there's no such thing as an objective truth and your reality is different for everyone, right? So her reality right now is, okay, she's applying to university, she needs the grades, it's super competitive. And so she might be able to justify and say, okay, well, given the circumstances that I'm in, it is okay for me to take a look at this test because like she really needs it, right? One of the other things we pointed out is that, since like there's no record of her, taking a look, there's no witnesses around, it's kind of quiet. Since no one will know, then she might feel tempted to take a look at the test because, it doesn't affect anyone else. The teacher doesn't know, her peers don't know. And so this can kind of be like, closed behind the doors and no one will know. And also like kind of like what we said before, like what's true and what's not true, like I feel like in this postmodern world, it's very difficult to kind of define what truth is. And so she could easily, if she wanted to take advantage of it, she could easily say like, it never happened, right? And there's no one there to witness it and to say anything, and they can't say much about it. And yeah, I think those were all the points that we had.
That's great. Thank you so much. So postmodern thought, the viewpoint might lead Emily to question the very concept of academic integrity. And this is something that's, very important. Postmodernism challenges traditional norms and institutions, viewing them as socially constructed. Emily may question the fairness of a system that places intense pressure on students and may argue that the very nature of testing and grading is subjective. It's subjective anyways. I might as well just take advantage of the situation that's presented. In this perspective, she might be more inclined to see bending the rules as a form of resistance against an oppressive system. So this is also another aspect of how you can look at a viewpoint of somebody in this post sort of modern thought. So great input, guys. Thank you. We're going to go on to our next case study, and I had alluded to this earlier. So this is a recent article, a few months old in the Globe and Mail, but you'll find that it's, like I mentioned, the principles of this is still happening. It's still making the news every day. So I would like to be a little bit more specific as we break out into groups with sort of what your tasks are. So how are three main, as you sit together in groups, first thing, how are three main postmodern influences of secularism, spirituality, and selfism reflected in this article? And how are the three main elements of postmodernism, truth, culture, and language reflected in this article? Okay, so you may begin in your groups and discuss these things. We'll aim for about 10, 12 minutes or so. Show you that it has some real world application. So who would like to venture forth? Be the first. How about, are we okay to start on this side? Don't worry guys, there's no marks. There's no marks being assigned. Yeah.
All right, so for the first question, the three influences of secularism, spirituality, and selfism. So secularism basically means like there is no God, like there's no the knowledge of an all-powerful God, and there's no fear of God as well, right? So one of the grounds for like the whole LGBT movement is basically saying like, okay, we can just test our limits. There's no reason for us to say this is morally right or wrong, because if we don't believe in an objective truth, then there's really no one to tell us that what we're doing is wrong. And then the spirituality aspect of it comes into, okay, well, now that we don't believe in actual God, we can create our own gods, which is either, and it could come in all sorts of forms, whether it be like, seeking after like a higher sense of self, or looking for things to kind of like fill in that void, something to chase after. And so we see these people who are, striving for these rights and like, to transition or to, be called by certain pronouns. And that is kind of like, their sense of validation, which kind of leads into the last one, which is their sense of self. And this one is basically them trying to fill in that void, like finding that satisfaction in life, where, they don't like necessarily have to, like kids who are going to school, they don't have to get their parental consent to have like, teachers and other peers like call them by their preferred pronouns or names. And so this is kind of like feeding into their sense of self, like no one has to know, like this is my right, this is my choice, like no one could say anything about it because there's no objective truth. For the second question, do we have any points on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Adding to it is the culture. Let's say, Canada, we have huge different culture. There's Filipino, Chinese, Taiwanese, Iranians, Middle East, black. So they bring their own culture. And some of them, they don't believe in God, right? A lot of them actually. So when they are raised in their country and they come in here, they have different thought already. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right.
So they have different idea. So it's kind of it's blending into the society,
Right.
right? So the government, what they want when they go with the vote, democratic, they go with the people.
Absolutely.
This is what changing the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Right? So now we are heading to nowhere.
Yeah. Well put.
I guess something I wanna add. Also, kind of like adding on to the culture part, like we see like a lot of this stuff kind of feeding into the media and movies nowadays. Like you always have to have like someone who's like part of that community and like it's all under the umbrella of inclusiveness. But like, what is that also telling like like our like the younger generations as well and even like our language like you can't use certain words, you have to be very politically correct or else you're going to lose your job or get canceled and things like that. And so yeah, like this like particular issue I feel like is kind of like spread out through all facets of our lives in one way or another, like even at work, like it's a discussion and like there's a huge movement towards it and it's pretty scary to be honest. Like it's
Absolutely.
something to be
Absolutely.
concerned about.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. You guys, because Mike and Gabriel always go first, or yeah.
Okay. Okay. Basically, we were talking about this article and then how secularism, spirituality, and selfism are reflected. For secularism, basically, it's saying there's no absolute like morality. So all the things that were like considered morals, maybe in the past, like specifically when it pertains to gender, they're like those lines are basically like they're all blurred now. They don't like they're not there anymore. So you can just kind of do whatever you feel is correct. For spirituality, talked a little about how like earlier we talked about you can have a religion, but like it can't interfere with anything else. And I feel like it's specifically with Christianity, like you can have your religion as long as it doesn't interfere with other people's like freedoms or beliefs. So it was similar to like the parents, like I think it's similar like your parents believe you can have rights, but as long as it's not interfering with like how the children like view themselves or their thoughts, their expressions. And then for selfism, it's like it's essentially saying you can choose, like your pronouns. It's all based on yourself. It's whatever your thoughts are, your opinions. And like you said, like it's something like for expression, like satisfaction. Yes. And the second question, postmodernism, truth and culture. It's essentially saying the truth is not absolute. So a lot of the truths that were considered absolute, like specifically with gender, like they're not there anymore. It's sort of just up to the person, up to how they feel. So I feel like just the truth just like it doesn't exist. So like even like the like biological truths and stuff, like it's much more up for debate now. And for culture, um yeah, like it's just on the culture we live in now, like I think it's very yeah, like you can choose what you want. And then a lot of there is a big product of this culture is like people are, choosing their own gender, choosing their own pronouns. And yeah. And then I don't know for language and that labels are like arbitrary and evolving. I think this entire thing is based off of labels and
Very good
names
point.
and pronouns. And at some point they consider like it's considered very important now your pronouns, but then also like your gender label doesn't matter. So it's a little bit conflicting, but yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. Very good point. Thank you. Last and but not least, to take us home.
Okay, so I'll start by saying that most of our points were already taken. But I'll mention the things that
you're just reflecting your culture right now and your environment, Michael. So, anyways.
Some of the things we were discussing is particularly for spirituality, a lot of what comes up is like the children were born like this, or God made them this way, or right, like God loves them how they are. Like it always comes back as like, well, you should love everybody and created, so everybody just want them to be happy. And we were saying how yeah, we do preach that everybody should love everyone, but anytime that he encountered a sinner in the gospel, you know, it didn't just end by him expressing his love and walking away, right? There was always that next step where he
Absolutely, absolutely.
For selfism, something that we were thinking about was actually that like a lot of times now people want to find meaning in something, and I find that a lot of times the reason why people actually are because it fills that void. Like there's such a strong sense of community with them. They're like, we're welcoming you, you have belonging here, we're fighting for you. This is like a very strong community. So people almost feel like to be relevant or to like feel a sense of community, you know, convincing themselves that they are part of it. And another thing that we were talking about with language particularly was like the way in which all of this kind of uses specific words that makes it almost like by saying you're taking the children's rights, like what rights do children even have? Right? Like, yeah, children have a right to life, but let's see what rights children have, right? What are we taking away? And it almost antagonizes parents.
Absolutely.
Like it pins children against parents.
Absolutely.
Being like, okay, if you're a parent and your child is going through this, like, what can you do to create a comfortable space at home where your child can come talk to you and then necessary steps with that, right? What the language is doing is that it creates a divide in family, tries to put people against each other to bring them together to be able to tackle the situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, guys. You know, it's interesting. You know, I'm sure when I mentioned language before, it was just a small point. I never thought maybe language was such a big thing in postmodern thought. But how important is language now after we read this article? It's almost one of the major issues. Is there a question online, Nada? Okay. Oh, sorry. Do you mind reading the question for us? Or how does it work? Oh, yeah. Any questions while we wait, guys? This pretty much concludes what I have to say. We'll see what Brahani has to say. But any other questions, comments, concerns before we head off? No? Okay. I could, you know, I'll try to address it afterwards. If there's something that you want to ask, I'll try to post it online or something. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you next week. We'll continue this discussion. Thank you.
Share the syllabus again?
I was late, so I don't know. Yeah, no problem.